We are going to be in John chapter 4. John chapter 4 this morning. If you want to take a Bible and turn with us there. If you need a Bible, there may be one underneath the chair in front of you. If there's one at the table in the center in the back, if you want to grab one or someone to grab one for you. John chapter 4, beginning in verse 7 as we start this morning. And we pick up there, and it says, "A woman from Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, 'Give me a drink.' For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. And the Samaritan woman said to him, 'How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria?' For the Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. And Jesus answered her, 'If you knew the gift of God and who it is that is saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water.' And the woman said to him, 'Sir, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock.' Jesus said to her, 'Everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water I will give him will come in a spring of water welling up to eternal life.' The woman said to him, 'Sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water.' And Jesus said to her, 'Go, call your husband and come here.' And the woman answered him, 'I have no husband.' And Jesus said to her, 'You are right in saying, "I have no husband," for you have had 5 husbands, and the one who you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true.' And the woman said to him, 'Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship.' In verse 21, Jesus said to her, 'Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For the Father is seeking such a people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth.' The woman said to him, 'I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will teach us all things.' Jesus said to her, 'I who speak to you am he.' Just then his disciples came back, and they marveled that he was talking with a woman. But no one said, 'What do you seek?' or 'Why are you talking with her?' So the woman left the water jar and went away into town and said to the people, 'Come see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?' They went out of the town and were coming to him." In verse 39, many Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did." So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with them, and he stayed there 2 days, and many more believed because of his word. This morning we come to John chapter 4. And we enter into this passage beginning to look at the contrast of John chapter 3 and John chapter 4. If we remember last week in our study of John 3, we encountered the life of a man named Nicodemus. A righteous, in the eyes of the Jewish people, a righteous man. A religious ruler per se, one of the 72 charged with keeping the religious rules, charged with interpreting the Bible they had at the time, charged with interpreting how they were supposed to live, how they were supposed to keep the law, how they were supposed to please God, charged with bringing the sacrifices, charged with what we would call as keeping the gate, leading the worship, bringing people closer to God. Nicodemus, was a righteous, religious leader of the time, or so they thought. So John chapter 3 teaches us about how when Nicodemus comes to God or comes to Jesus, starts asking, "Who are you and what are you doing here?" after Jesus goes into the temple and starts turning over the tables and chasing out the oxen and the lamb and the pigeons. And he comes to Jesus and says, "Who are you and what is this all about? We perceive you are from God." And Jesus says, "No, I'm not from God. I am God." And Jesus teaches Nicodemus on the spot. He addresses him by way of who he is. He says, "You must be born again." Why? Because if we look at Nicodemus' life, he comes from a very proud spot. A proud spot of religious leadership, a proud spot of being a part of the church his whole life, knowing the laws, knowing the word, knowing the scripture that they had, and a proud spot in leadership. So Jesus comes to him and addresses him directly where he is. And so the first point we need to get this morning is Jesus addresses the people where they are. He addressed Nicodemus where he is. He says, you must be born again. Why? Because he tells Nicodemus, in order for you to know God, in order for you to come into the kingdom of heaven, you must become like a child. So in order of being, instead of being one of the 72, one of the religious caste system rulers, you must become humble, become like a child. What do children need? They need everything given to them. They can do nothing on their own. They can't take care of themselves. They can't bathe themselves. They can't eat for themselves. So Jesus tells Nicodemus, you must become like a child in order to gain access to the kingdom of heaven. In other words, everything that you think you can do on your own is wrong. Everything that you think you know about God, you have misinterpreted. You must become like a child. You must be born again. And today in John 4, it's no coincidence here that John 4 follows John 3. It's not just the numbers here, but the stories in John 4 follow the stories in John 3, because Jesus again addresses the heart of the Samaritan woman exactly where she is, and addresses her the way she needs to be addressed. Because if we go back and say and bring the message of Nicodemus to the Samaritan woman, you must be born again. Well, there's going to be a conflict of message here for her. What does it mean to be born again? For she has a whole different boundaries of issues. So as we begin looking at a couple of different paths we could take in this message this morning, we could go down this evangelism path and this proselytizing path and say, just go down the road and just start telling everybody, you need to be saved, you need to be saved. Well, Jesus comes at this at a radically different way of saying, let's look at the heart of people. Let's look at where they are and address the needs of the heart. And so what we see here coming into John chapter 4 is he addresses the hearts of people. And so what could be easy for us this morning, and the path that we don't need to take, is we don't need to come into this passage this morning saying that I represent Jesus here. I'm going to go and I'm going to be the one who goes and brings out the message of condemnation. I'm going to be the one who goes and says, you have done blank and blank wrong. But rather, we should come to this, no matter how many times we've read this, no matter how many times we've studied the Greek, a part of this passage, we need to come at this with fresh eyes and understand that you and I come at this from the message of the Samaritan woman, because we all come at this with our brokenness, with our sin nature intact. And Jesus comes to address the Samaritan woman where she is. And so we come to this passage looking at the Samaritan, someone who is thought of as the lowliest of the low. And again, Jesus brings the message of salvation. But it's presented radically different than we saw in John 3. This morning we find the message of the gospel presented personally. And Martin Lloyd-Jones, a pastor in England, put it this way. He says, you cannot imagine a greater contrast than between Nicodemus and the woman of Samaria. Yet the same Lord deals with the two people, and he is concerned about precisely the same message. We look at the contrast, man and woman. And in the context of the day, men wouldn't speak to women. That wasn't something that was okay. But not even is just man and woman the contrast that we're going to see here, but Jew and Samaritan. These are not just empty terms. In verse 9 of John 4, we are told that in passing, the Jews had no dealings with Samaritans. We have come to the specific meaning of this a little bit later in our passage. But here was the old feud and old trouble between them, that they didn't get along. Culturally, they didn't like each other. What happened here is the Samaritans went off and they intermarried, but they went off and they decided that, hey, the Jewish people and us, we want to be part of rebuilding the temple. The Jews said no, so they went up here and they decided they were going to do their own thing. And they were going to be their own people. So what happened? They started marrying with the locals. Now, what does God tell us not to do? To not marry with an unbeliever here. Why? Because then you start intermingling with unbelieving thoughts, and then what do we have happening here? Paganism. Isn't that exactly what happened with Solomon when he lost the temple? What happened? He married all these unbelieving ladies, and what happened? He started including all these thoughts and religious thoughts into what he was doing and leading the kingdom. and he lost the kingdom. They interjected what was going on. And so we see what's happening here is the Samaritans, when they wanted to be a part of rebuilding the temple, the Jewish people in Jerusalem said, no, we've got this. And so they got mad and they got all huffy and they said, fine, you build your temple, we're going to build our temple, we're going to do our thing up here, we're going to have our people. They started intermarrying locally. We see this whole paganism thing start going on. Now in our day and age, we just call this the occult. When you start taking some truth, mixing it with half-truth, what happens here is called the occult. Where do you think we get Jehovah's Witnesses from? Where do we think we get the Mormons from? It's some truth mixed with no truth, and you get absolutely brokenness. And that's why it's so confusing most of the time when you start dealing with how do you share the gospel with Jehovah's Witnesses? How do you share the gospel with Mormonism? Because they have some of it. But some of it minus Jesus, some of it minus the gospel equals a false religion here, right? And so that's what we see going on here, is we see some of the brokenness of what's happening here. So there's this feud here going on. And so here is what we see beginning to take place. Is there's a remarkable contrast here between Nicodemus, so between the Samaritan woman, because you have a Jew and you have a Samaritan. And then, of course, you have the contrast between men and women. Whatever else Christianity might have done, it's the overriding power that it liberates women to be part of the fellowship, to be part of the church. Standing here, and here Jesus goes and he addresses a woman. He includes her in the fold and he says, you are important to me. You're important to this conversation. So ladies here, recognize that Jesus doesn't bypass us. He doesn't decide to go to the well and just take the pot and get the water himself, but he addresses her. Because why? Because she's important in the kingdom of heaven. She's important here. The central theme of the gospel is that Jesus is addressing the heart of the people. There is neither Jew, there's neither Greek, there's neither bond, slave, there is neither free, there's neither male, there's neither female. We get this from Galatians 3:28. This is all addressed here. And so when we look at what's unfolding here, as we look at John 4, we find a woman who is in sin, for she's had 5 husbands. 5 husbands. Look at what's happening here from verse 1 to verse 6. Jesus learned that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus was making and baptizing more disciples than John. And so we jump down. So he comes to a town of Samaria called Sychar near the field of Jacob. And we see that Jesus was wearied from his journey and he was sitting beside the well in verse 6. And it was the 6th hour. The 6th hour is important here. So here we come into verse 7. And a woman from Samaria came to draw water at the 6th hour. And he said to her, give me a drink. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food, and the Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a woman of Samaria? For the Jews had no dealings. We unpacked this. If you knew the gift of God and who it is that's saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you the living water. So we see this unpacking here, and we notice that he says he had to go through. He had to go through. He left Judea in verse 3 and departed for Galilee, and he had to pass through, verse 4. John chapter 4, verse 4, notice this. He had to pass through Samaria. Now follow with me on this. Verse 4 of chapter 4 is radically important to our understanding of why the gospel is going to Samaria right here. Most Jews would have done anything they possibly could to avoid Samaria. Why? Because they don't get along. If you're going to avoid a family feud, you just don't show up at the family reunion. You know what I'm saying? You just don't go. And if you're one of those people who are going to be thick-skinned, all you women, you just go anyway and you grin and bear it and you have the fried chicken and you go home. You know what I'm saying? Enough sweet tea will do with any kind of feud. You know what I'm saying? But for most Jewish people here, they're going to avoid Samaria at all costs. So John chapter 4, verse 4, he says he had to pass through. Now why? Why does he have to pass through? Why, when most of the time they would go 6 days to go around Samaria, does Jesus have to say to pass through? 6 days is the round trip to pass Samaria. 3 days takes you through Samaria. Now, most of us Westerners will say we're going to take the 3-day journey by foot, not the 6-day journey. I mean, for us to walk to the water fountain, we're like, man, that's a trip. Can we put one closer to us? 6-day journey around Samaria here. And Jesus, it says in verse 4, he had to go through it here. Now get this. Get this, it's a spiritual necessity. This is not an accident, but this is a part of the sovereign plan of God. It's one of the most astounding things about the whole gospel of salvation and what it offers us. The real force of these words is he was aware of the compulsion sending him through Samaria. The real force of these words is it means that he's going to meet the woman in Samaria. There's no coincidence here. He knows what's going on. He knows who is going to see what's going to happen here. We've already seen that the Lord wanted to break down the division between the Jews and the Samaritans, between the men and the women. But the great thing is that this is not an accident. In the realm that's happening here, that there's nothing that's accidental. Is this not one of the great marks of our salvation? Think about this for a moment, that God planned it before the foundation of the world. Think about this. He planned our salvation before the foundation of the world, that he knew us individually before the foundation of the world, that our names were written in the Lamb's Book of Life before the foundation of the world, before we were even born. This is glorious. This is the gospel. This is wonderful. The whole doctrine of the call, it is involved in this phrase that he knows, and he knows us. He knows about us, and he meets us. This goes back to John 1, where we recognize that Jesus came and he's fully human and fully God, and he knows. He's not just some random guy walking around on the planet stirring up trouble, but he's God, and he knows each one of us, and he knows about us, and he meets our needs, and he meets us. John chapter 4, verse 4 is not just some random verse thrown in there to get us to keep on reading to verse 5, to get us on to verse 7, where you start getting into the soap opera segment of chapter 4. But no, it's to get us to understand that God knows where we are, knows where we need to be to meet us. And we cannot deny the sovereignty of God being displayed in the life of this woman. And it's also in the future we see in the life of church in Acts 1. Remember Acts 1:8, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you'll be my witnesses in where? In Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Where has Jesus been already? He's been in Jerusalem, and he's been in Judea, and now he's in Samaria. So he's demonstrating, not only does he tell us what to do, but he's demonstrating what he's going to tell us to do before he even tells us what to do. He's demonstrating the life. There's no coincidences here. It's laid out exactly as he wants it to be. So in verse 7, we pick up again, he says, and a woman came to draw water, and Jesus is passing through, and he becomes tired and thirsty, for he is passing through a desert in the middle of the day. Think about this. We live in a desert, July, about 6 o'clock in the evening, and you're standing in the sun. It's hot. Y'all know what I'm saying? We did these things called Backyard Bible Club last summer, and we decided that the best time to do one was between 5:30 and 7:30. 6 o'clock, it's hot. Now, where I grew up, it's hot, but we have this thing called humidity. Here, it's hot in the sun, and it's just hot. It's just, y'all call it a dry heat. We just call it next to hell, you know what I'm saying? It's just hot. You know, we want to start teaching on hell. We're going to start doing that in July. Moving on into August, and we'll start our series on hell, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like that. But here, notice, it's the 6th hour of the day. He's passing through. He gets tired and thirsty. Point number 1, he's human. Point number 2, of course you're thirsty. What happens if you don't have water here? You dehydrate. He stops by Jacob's well, and he turns and he asks this woman for some water, which is against all customs. Why? Because he shouldn't be talking to a woman. He shouldn't be seen alone with a woman, which is a good practice for men here. And around 720 BC, the Assyrians came. And here's the backstory here. They conquered the Israelites and expelled most of the Jews, and they were left and ended up intermarrying with the Babylonians here. So that's the full backstory, and they mix religions. And so the Jews, they come back, and they're like, we're not going to have anything to do with you. And so here, there's all these backstories of why we don't intermix here. But the fact that she was a Samaritan goes against all this, but Jesus says, give me some water. I'm thirsty. Now, she's caught off guard. In her mind, we know from the story is she's had 5 husbands. The guy she's with is not her husband. So in her mind, she's thinking, is this guy trying to hit on me? Is he trying to take advantage of me? What's the deal? Because he's not supposed to be talking to me. Start putting yourself in the context of this situation here. We're not friendly. For those of you who grew up in the days of segregation, think about it this way. From the place where I grew up, there were different water fountains for the different races. This would be the same type of thing. You don't drink out of my pot because that makes you unclean. If Jesus were to drink from the Samaritan pot, he would be declared unclean. So you look at that and you say, you're not supposed to do this. And we all know that's wrong. And so here, Jesus says to her, it's hot. I'm thirsty. And Jesus answers her in verse 10, if you knew the gift of God and who is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. And the woman said to him, sir, you have nothing with to draw water with, and the well is deep. She's a very practical type of lady. Where do you get that living water? And are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself and his sons and his livestock. But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. Notice this. Jesus changes the tone of the conversation. He says, whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring of water welling up into eternal life. And the woman said to her, sir, give me some of this water that I will not be thirsty and I will not have to come here to draw water. Think about this. What is a lady doing in the middle of the desert at the 6th hour of the day? She has 5 husbands. The one she's with now is not her husband. She's ashamed. She comes out here because all the rest of the ladies come out early in the morning to get their water. They come out here earlier in the day when it's cool. Think about it. We live in a day. This isn't hard for us to grasp. Bruce and I were just joking about that the other day. I came home from meetings in Denver the other day, and it was hot upstairs in our house. So what did I do? When I got ready to go to bed, I turned on the fan and opened the window. What happens the next morning when I wake up? I am freezing. Legitimately that's not an exaggeration. I am legitimately freezing because what happens at night here? It's cold. Welcome to spring, winter, whatever, spring. But we know when darkness happens here, it cools off, and the whole planet cools off here. And so the women go out early in the day, and they take these massive pots to go get water because their family needs water to begin their day, to make breakfast, to feed the animals. They need water to start. They need water to survive. But she doesn't go out. Why? Because she's probably the talk of the local gossip. We've probably been part of those circles sometimes. We know somebody who probably isn't what they should be, and we sit around in a group of people and say, look at that person, look at, if only they could get their life together. Why would they dress that way? Why would they do blank, blank, and blank? And we, in our minds, or even out loud in a group of people, we probably think, man, if that's just not okay. And we do that. And so here this lady is avoiding the shame and the mockery of what's going on, and she's, fine, I'm just going to go out and I'm going to go out there in the hottest part of the day. And she's not doing it for a weight loss program here. She's doing it because she's afraid of being around people. She goes out there in the hottest part of the day into the desert to get water in this massive pot to bring it back. And so Jesus says, whoever drinks of the water I bring will never thirst again. And the woman says to her, give me the water so I'll be thirsty and I won't have to come here to drink water. Practical thing. If you give me this water and I'm never going to thirst again, I can stop this midday trek out to the desert because this isn't pleasant. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm not big on this. Think about those chores that you have to do, but more than that, think about the shame that she feels, why she has to hide, why she goes out when everybody else is inside, because she's avoiding. She says, make my life easier here on a practical need. I just want some of that. And so we expect here, right here, that Jesus is going to bring a full revelation of himself and to speak to this woman, to present the gospel, not leaving anything out. But when you look at his story, if you put yourself in this position, he speaks to her in a way that's slowly revealing what's happening. And here Jesus is offering water, living water, not just living water, but water that's running in a stream, the water of life, the same type of water we see spoken about in Psalms 42:1, and Isaiah 55:1, where in Isaiah, the prophet writes, come everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Everyone who has no money, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without money and without a price. But she doesn't get it. And we have no right to judge her because we probably wouldn't have gotten it either. Here's a foreigner speaking to her, asking for water, then offering water that'll never run out, all in the same conversation. It's quite amazing. And her first reaction is, oh no, this must be God. Yippee, let's worship. No, it's let's take care of this need. Let's get this deal so we no longer have to carry this heavy pot on our back every day and not worry about all the gossip that's going on. Think about how many of us react to the message of salvation. On a practical sense here, how many of us hear the message of salvation? Do we hear the message of salvation is the hellfire and brimstone? And okay, we hear it preached really hard. You're going to go to hell. You're going to burn. And it's going to be eternally painful. And we're like, okay, can we get another option here? I like my ice cream with sprinkles. Like that option over there, that burning eternally doesn't sound so great. So what's the other option? And so how many of us, when we hear the message of the gospel, now this is me not condemning hellfire and brimstone type of preachers, but me actually asking the question, when we hear the message and we hear about hellfire and brimstone, which it's real, it's actual, there is a literal hell where you will be separated from God from eternity, but when we hear about it, do we choose option B because we want something that's less hot? And so whatever the guy says next, we're like, sign me up. And so he says, you got your ticket for forever, come down the aisle, we're going to put you in some water. And you're like, well, water is practically smart because water equals not fire. And then we just end up confused because our life doesn't end up much better. But she's missing the point, and Jesus points out her sin, and he takes it straight to the heart. For the issue of the thirst is so much more than just water. Here, follow with me on this train of thought. The issue of thirst is so much more than just water. The issue is the passions of the heart and the lust of the mind. And here Jesus addresses her thirst. He says, go call your husband. So this is when she comes over here and starts polishing that pot. She's going to start looking away. Go call your husband. And the woman answered, I have no husband. She's not lying. I have no husband. And you are right in saying you have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have is not your husband. And what you have said is true. And Jesus addresses the heart. He asks her to go and bring her husband back, and he knows full well. Why? Because he's a God, and he knows that she doesn't currently have a husband, and the man she's currently with is not her husband, but this is what she desires. This is what she needs to find fulfillment in. This is what she thinks is going to bring her peace and happiness and joy, and the water is not going to cut it for her. The water is just a momentary fix to a momentary problem, and tomorrow she's going to have to come back and get more water. Jesus is saying, come to me, and I'm going to give you living water so that you'll never thirst again. What is he saying is, I'm going to fill this need so that you won't have thirst again, so you won't have to go looking for more husbands and more things to fill your felt desires. Friends, we cannot miss this point. It's not about never needing water. It's about you never needing things, never needing fulfillment in other places and other people, never needing other gods or other people, never seeking purposes on this planet. For we were created for a purpose, and we were created for a place, and that purpose and that place is the kingdom of God and the King. Here's where we all stand, for we all thirst for something. We all have that appetite that is wet and that is constantly tempting us, whether it be sex, alcohol, drugs, video games, money, fame, wealth, being a philanthropist, being a pastor, being a missionary, being sex or money or seeking fulfillment. You notice I said those things twice because we want jobs to fill us, we want money to fulfill us, we want our marriage, if we want something to fulfill us in this life, we keep looking for it and we are missing out on being fulfilled by God. For if we truly believe the word of God, if we truly worship Jesus, then he is our ultimate source of fulfillment. And we see part of this illustrated in Matthew chapter 6. And he says in verse 25, therefore I tell you, don't be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you'll drink, nor about your body or what you will put on it. Is not life more than food, and the body about more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither reap nor sow, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you of not more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? And why are you being anxious about clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which today is alive and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, O you of little faith? Therefore do not be anxious, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the Gentiles seek after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. And all of this is what Jesus is addressing in the heart of this woman, and perhaps it is for us too. So the response was to turn back to a theological and doctrinal debate. And this is a good response. And so remember, we left off in verse 18. And Jesus is saying to the woman, I know that what you have said is true. You've had more husbands, and the guy you're currently with is not your husband. Remember, she's off looking into the pot now, staring down into the water, trying to break eye contact here. Look at verse 19 in chapter 4. Her response. The woman said to her, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. What church do you go to? Oh, wait, that's not what verse 20 says. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where we ought to worship. And Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem you will worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for the salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father, get this, underline this. The Father is seeking such a people to worship him. The Father is seeking such a people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming, he who is called the Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Look at verse 26. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Literally, look at the beginning of this. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. Literally, if we were having this conversation today, it'd be like when we are talking to someone about the gospel, we're addressing the felt needs of people. I perceive you know the truth. What church do you go to so I don't end up there? When Jesus comes back, he's going to tell us all these things, and all of a sudden Jesus says, I'm him. And they're like, oh. What else do we say now? She changes the subject. She moves on. Because she's confessed what's going on in her life. She's confessed the shame of why she has to come out of the 6th hour of the day. She's confessed, so we jump down, and when she says she knows the Messiah is coming, so where and how are we supposed to worship? You Jews worship in Jerusalem, and we worship here on Mount Gerizim. There has to be a right place to worship. That's the question we need to ask, right? And Jesus quickly brings the focus back. The hour is coming when you will not worship on this mountain, and you will not worship in Jerusalem. For here, Jesus, again, he uses the hour. What does the hour mean? The hour, again, foretells of his death. The hour when he will be lifted up, and they will worship him. And the need for the temple will cease, and the sins will be atoned for, and even greater when the consummation of the kingdom comes, as we see in Revelation, there will no longer be people split by tribes, tongues, and nations, but there will be one people, God's people. God's children worshiping together around the throne singing, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The hour is here, Jesus says. It's not just coming, but look at it in this passage. He says the hour is coming and the hour is now here, for which Jesus is speaking of since he addressed his mother at the wedding. The hour when he would be raised on the cross and raised from the dead. The hour is no small hour, the hour for which we yearn for. This is what we're looking forward to, what we're going to celebrate in just a couple of weeks on Easter, when we desire to celebrate the anticipated moment of healing that we talked about in Numbers chapter 21, when they look to him. And what happens when we look to him? We are healed. No matter how bad the affliction, no matter how close to death we are healed. The hour, says Jesus, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. It's no longer about political sides. It's no longer about power. It's no longer about former feuds, about styles of worship. It's no longer about buildings or colors of the carpet or the walls. It's no longer about styles of music, because that's not what any of this is about. We are not about this. We aren't the recipients of worship. We're the ones who are the worshipers. We are the worshipers. It's not about styles of music, styles of preaching. It's not about denominations, but about worshiping God. Who is the recipient of worship? God is. So it's not about if the worship pleases us. Get this. It's not about if the style of music, the color of the walls, or the style of preaching pleases us. It only matters if it pleases one person. Who is that one person? God. So if the song was written in 1770 or in 2018, the only person that matters if it pleases is God. Because here in John 4, it says he is seeking. He's seeking true worshipers. The Father is seeking worshipers. It's a massive point of us. In verse 23, the Father is seeking worshipers. Jesus says, it is time now for the worshipers to be set apart, for the true worshipers to worship regardless of the background, regardless of the location, regardless of our identity, our race, our who we think we are, but based on who God is. This is the time, today is the day the Father is seeking worshipers, not the religious, not the zealots. Remember how Jesus approached Nicodemus, the proud and the self-righteous. He says, you must become like a child. Now he approaches this woman who is broken, who is lowly, and he says, you are worthy. He says to her, you are worthy and you are welcome, and he offers her life. The message of the gospel is, get this, the message of the gospel is personal. The message of the gospel is a call to worship. The message of the gospel is a call to leave everything else behind. All that is religious, all that is worldly, all that is sensual, all that is self-fulfilling, and be filled by the King. John 1:16. Catch this. John 1:16. Be filled from his fullness that we have received, grace upon grace. Friends, this morning we need to grasp the massive doctrinal and theological point of grace and salvation. Salvation is not just an option to avoid fear or hell, but grace flows out of love. Grace flows out of love, out of an understanding that God is enough, God is all. Look at this. He addresses the woman and he says, you have all these husbands at home, but that's never going to be enough for you. It will never be enough. Think about your life this morning. Think about the things that you keep stuffing in your life and the way you put things in your life and how you keep looking for satisfaction and fulfillment in your life. Jesus is saying to us, as the Samaritans in this room this morning, saying, that's never going to be enough. God is enough. God is everything and all that we need, even when everything else is failing and falling apart all around us. He's saying, I am enough. I am good enough. We do not just worship to escape hell. It's not about an escape. It's about knowing that you're a child. We see this in Galatians chapter 4, that he has called us, that he's adopted us, that he has chosen us, that he has made us his sons and his daughters, his princes and his princesses. That's not just fluffy language that we just use in church to make us feel better. That is an absolute that we find in Scripture, that he has called us his sons and daughters in the kingdom of heaven. That we are adopted. This is the message of salvation. It's what we learn in this passage, that we are all relatable to the Samaritan woman. We have multiple mistresses. They just come in all shapes and sizes, and the idols in our lives. And in the midst of our self-worship, he comes and he meets us in the midst of our mess. Often when we talk to someone about the gospel, they say, well, I need to get this stuff together. I think we can all admit the mess never gets better. But grace is enough. Grace is enough. Verse 27, the disciples come back from getting tacos, and they marveled that he was talking with a woman. They're missing the point. For the life of Jesus, those 3 years, the disciples' motto should be experiences and missing the point. They marveled that he was talking with the woman, but no one said, "What do you seek?" or "Why are you talking with her?" So the woman left her water jar and went away into town and said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" And they went out of the town and were coming to him. The disciples were astounded, and they find Jesus sitting there having this conversation with this woman, and they start debating about the situation. But notice this, the woman is still the object of our attention here. And she goes back to town, and she goes back and she says to the people, notice this, "Come and see a man who told me all that I ever did. Can this be the Christ?" Now maybe I'm the cynic here because we use the illustration of the screens last week. Imagine if all of our mess was playing on the screens live right here. But she goes back to town and she says, "Come see this man who told me everything I ever did." And you can imagine the women are sitting back there saying, "Well, that's not real hard. It's not real hard to start telling you all you ever done. I mean, it's a kind of a life experience thing here." How would we respond if the local woman of the town came in and said, "You wouldn't believe what this guy came and told me all that I've ever done in my life"? And you'd be like, "Well, we read it in the newspaper. We've seen you on TV. We see you all over Facebook. We know that..." But get this, the grace is enough for her to go back and what? Become the town's number one evangelist. Why? Because the grace is enough to cover the shame. To cover the shame. When we talk about our sins on the screen or just our mess on the screen like we talked about last week, is the gospel enough for you to look at your mess and say, "That's all right. The gospel is enough for my mess"? Because she went back and it was enough for her mess. And the people come and they hear and they see Jesus, and the woman gave up her pride. The woman gave up the moment and she surrendered herself, and she became a follower of Christ in the moment. We don't know. We don't definitively know. We could tend to believe so. What we do know is that in verse 39, many Samaritans from that town believed because of the woman's testimony. And he told me all that I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with him. And they stayed there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. And they said to the woman, "It is not longer because of what you said that we believe, for we have heard from ourselves, and we know indeed that this is the Savior of the world." One woman in sin, thirsting after pleasures of this life, hears the message of Jesus, brings the whole town to hear the message, and they believe. What is it that you are thirsting after? For none of us here thirst after Jesus naturally. Remember, we taught last week, we are all enemies of God. We are all the woman at the well, caught in sin, seeking some source of satisfaction. If we are redeemed, you and I are redeemed, we need to come back and be reminded that we are his children, and we need to come back and worship. The question is, are we truly redeemed? If you are seeking Jesus, he says in John 7, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me," as scripture says, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. It's a very direct passage. "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink." Maybe this is not appropriate, but if anyone is tempted, if anyone is anxious, if anyone desires lust, if anyone is seeking, if anyone is lonely, put that blank there. If anyone, let him come to me and drink. If anyone is fearful, whoever believes in me, as scripture said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. This morning, hear the message of the gospel. Hear the message of a God who is intimately involved individually with the redemption of his people. John chapter 4, verse 4, he had to go there. Why? Because there was a lady sitting at a well who was lonely and longing for something, who had been filling her life full of men to fulfill the desires that she thought would complete her. He had to go there. Because not only was she here, but she would go and tell the rest of the town. The Samaritans hear and they believe that he is the Messiah who has come. He had to go there. This morning in our life, where is it that we are? What is it that we are stuffing in our lives? John 4 is no less great, no less important than John chapter 3. John chapter 4 is the message of the gospel and the same greatness that we see in John chapter 3. Perhaps we quote it less because we don't want to have to quote the fact that we are great sinners in need of a great Savior and a great grace, and that we are people full of great shame who can stand in front of people and say, my shame is no more because my God is great. My God is great, and he is enough. He is enough. This morning, let's look at our hearts. Let's examine those questions. Whether religious or broken, let's all come back to the point this morning of recognizing that we have these idols and we have these things that we stuff in our life. If you're a believer here this morning, come back to him and drink from the water. Come back. If you're not a believer here this morning, come to the well and drink and be filled. Be filled. So that we don't keep stuffing things in there.